Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're here with a review of a game called Viral from Arcane Wonders. This is an area control game in the human body.
Yeah, it's actually a fantastic game. It's another one of Tom Vassel's Dice Tower Essentials. I don't think he's missed on this yet, but this is a really good area control style game. You're each playing a virus and you're infecting the human body, and each of these zones control a specific number of organs within them, in which you're going to be placing tokens in there and then using cards to manipulate how they move within the organs.
Yeah, there's a really cool action card mechanism here that allows you to either move a virus or add a virus or attack another virus. Yeah. All the sorts of things you'd find in an area control game, but here you're doing it in the pancreas and not in a country.
And the great thing too is that there's such a few number of components in the game. It does so much with so few. Each of the let's talk about the game board first. The game board itself has the human body. Now there's 6 different zones that are broken into a set of organs. So for instance, the brain, that is one zone, but it's also just one organ. Right below it you have zone 2, but it has the left and the right side of the heart. So there's different kinds of zones, with the biggest zone being over here, that's zone 5, but it has 3 different organs within it. Also on the board you have a scoring track. Now the scoring track is kind of cool because when you get to certain areas score-wise, you get more mutations. Each player is going to start with 5 different mutations.
But all the same.
All the same.
Across each player.
Right, but they're going to have the opportunity to gather 4 new mutations through the course of the game by drafting cards here, either from the face-up ones or from the top of the deck.
Yeah, and these things not only allow you to do more of what you have been doing with your base cards, but they add some different abilities as well that make things a little more interesting.
Yes. Also on the player board, you have all 6 of the different phases within the game. So there's 6 phases, and they take place over 6 rounds, which are denoted by these event cards. There's 13 different events. You're going to get some variability in the game by which ones you randomly pick in the course of the game. Also, each player is going to start with 6 cards that represent those 6 zones within the game as well.
Yeah, so why don't we start and talk about this turn structure? Because one of the things that's great about this game is they lay it out. There's a lot of iconography, but it's pretty easy to follow, and they've got it right here on the board, so it's a very accessible game.
One thing you need to know before we get into that is that everything in the game is broken, ties are broken by the very bottom of the game board, which is also how you set up the game. This breaks every single tie in the game, with the highest being the first tiebreaker and further down. That also signifies the player order at the very start of the game. So the orange player is the start at the beginning, and then in reverse turn order, players are going to seed the board with one of their viruses. And these virus tokens look different depending upon which player that you have. Now the virus tokens themselves are two-sided. You have regular viruses, and then you have shielded viruses. So at the start, if I'm the starting player, David would be able to place one of his viruses anywhere on one particular organ, and you're going to keep going around placing a new virus in a place where you don't have one in a particular zone.
Right, you can place it in any organ, but you can't place it in the same zone that you've already placed.
Right.
Unless there's no other options. And in a 4-player game or more, that's definitely going to happen, so you can actually figure out a way to maybe have a little dominance right off the bat.
Yep, so then you go directly into the turns, starting with the first player, or the player who's the highest. Each player simultaneously is going to look through all their cards. Now, as I said, you have 6 zone cards at the start, which represent each of the different areas, and then you have 5 mutation cards. You're going to pick one of each of these in secret, and you're going to keep those together and place them on the left side of your player board.
Right.
Everybody's going to do this at the same time, and then everybody reveals. And when you reveal them, you just simply show what you're doing and in what particular area.
Right, and then in player turn order, you're going to execute those actions. So for instance, Jeremy played the brain and a card that allows him to infect the organ that he played, because some of the action icons, they'll either be blue or they'll be white.
Yes.
If they're blue, that action must take place in the organ or in the zone that you played that round.
Right.
If they're white, you can do that anywhere on the board.
Right, so in this instance, I played white, so I'd infect the brain, and then I get to kill something that is there. So I would take this and give it back to the player that I killed. And you're just going to keep going around the board with each player in turn order doing that particular action. Once that is done, you pick another hand.
Yep, you do it again. This time you put the 2 cards on the right-hand side of your board. You do exactly as we just said, going around the board again. What's great about this and this sort of staggered approach is that you're able to look at what everyone did the first half of the round, if you will,
Right.
and then kind of maybe adjust.
That's right. Once those two actions are done, in subsequent rounds, what's going to happen is any of the cards that were above your player board will come back to the player's hand. However, the cards that you use for that round cannot be used for the next round. So you're going to take both stacks and place them above your player board face up. That means that in the next round when you're picking cards, you can't go to those zones and you can't use those mutations again.
Right. Plus, I know that Jeremy can't go to the brain, so
Yes.
it helps everyone around the table figure out what they might want to do and what other people can or can't do.
That's right. The second round is the point scoring round for the most part. This is where players are going to look at the board and possibly score points for areas they control. Now, it's very important to understand control in this game. Controlling simply means that in each zone, you have to have presence in every single organ there. So in the brain, I control this because there's only one organ there,
Right.
and I have the most there. In this instance, the heart, this player has control in both of these areas, or has presence, meaning that they control it. Now, if there's a tie, you're going to look at the bottom,
tiebreaker.
at the
Exactly.
tiebreaker at the bottom, as long as there's not someone who has more of one.
Exactly. It
that
starts
area.
with a majority, and like Jeremy said, there's that limitation where you have to be in every organ. Other than that, you look to the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
You're going to basically go from zone to zone, calculating the points. And at the top of these little tokens here, there's the points that you'll get, and then at the bottom is the interesting part. This is the research that's going to happen. And you'll see +1 research. That's not a good +1 research.
Right.
These are the doctors and the scientists outside of the body trying to research the viruses. And once the research tracks get up to the top, they're going to eliminate your virus. So every time you get a resource point, your token climbs up this independent little track
That's
here.
right. Now, it needs to be noted as well that these tokens are random. They start in random locations, and there's more than 6 here. There's a possibility of a variety of different tokens that can be played. Some of these tokens actually have negatives at the
Right.
bottom. In this case, in this game, we don't have any negative tokens. So any kind of control that you're going to be doing is going to positively affect that research track.
Exactly. And in most cases, those are going to be low points,
Yes.
but the benefit is reducing the research on your virus.
Right, so you're going to score points, you're going to move up the research track. The next thing that happens is the event. Remember, these mark the number of rounds in the game. Everybody's going to be affected by the event here, and those events will give you victory points depending on where you have control in areas or other means by
Right, and you're
by which
going to
says
know
on the card.
and you're going to know what that event is from the beginning of the round,
Yep.
so you can kind of prepare for it. There's 6 here. As soon as you resolve that, it goes to the bottom of the deck or discard it out of the game, and you'll see the next event card for the next round.
Yep, the next thing that happens is the immune response.
Right.
This is pretty cool. So, depending upon the number of players, however many control markers that go into a zone could create a crisis in that particular organ. So in a 5-player game, once there are 5 viruses in a very particular organ, it creates a crisis.
And it should be noted, for instance, here in the pancreas and the liver, it's not going to add those up across both of them. It is just one organ or the other. So once there are 5 here, you're going to take the lowest valued crisis token and also add that to the organ. Now this is going to come into play here in a minute,
Yep.
but you just know that there's going to be an additional chance to score, but also there's some devastating effects as well. Right.
What you look at here is to see whoever has the most viruses in that particular area. In this case, it would be the white player, so they get 2 victory points. Every other player that is in this organ will get 1 victory point.
Right.
And then what's going to happen is the crisis goes away and all the tokens come back to the players.
Right. And whenever tokens are taken off the board or negatively affected like that, if you've shielded one of your viruses,
Yes.
that token is simply going to flip over and remain on the board. So that's where that shielding effect comes into play.
Yep, the 5th step in the game is the cures. Now, this is why research can be bad for the players. If at any point a player hits the top of the research track, during step 5, all of their viruses in the entire human body and every organ and every zone will be wiped off
Exactly.
back into their supply, which means they're going to have a hard time replacing all those things and getting points in future rounds. So you want to kind of manage where you're controlling, where you're getting your victory points, and which point values you're going up, because you don't want to go up too quickly because you're going to be negated on the next round.
And this is a game of timing as well, because if in a game like this where you have no tokens that offer negative research, eventually you're going to be kicked out.
Yes.
So you want to make sure and time that so that you're kicked out at a time where on the next round you're able to take advantage of it and not everyone else is.
Right. As we mentioned at the very beginning, we were talking about the different powers that you could use by placing your mutations. One of the powers in here is called absorption. And that's when you use an absorption thing. When you place a guy in here, it absorbs everything underneath of it. This is great because it allows you to get control of those areas.
Right.
During phase 6, you release all those absorptions. That's the first thing that happens. And then, looking at the score track, the player who is leading goes last.
Right. So that's basically the round, steps 1 through 6. You're going to repeat that 6 times.
Yep.
Basically, moving viruses, adding viruses, killing viruses. The game starts to get really exciting when you add these other mutations to your hand.
Yeah.
It should be noted, too, there are point values on some of these mutation cards. So there's a few different ways to start scoring some of your points. Obviously, there's the points on the board.
Yep.
But these points on the mutation cards shouldn't be overlooked either.
So you're probably asking, how do you get the mutations? Once you reach a very specific portion on the scoring track, you're going to be able to pick one of these or one of the top cards and add it to your hand. That means that you're going to be able to use that on a future round. Also, when any one of the players reaches 21, it's going to flip over all of these scoring tiles and adjust the scoring tracks on the game, which allows some of them to gain more points, some to gain fewer points, and so forth.
Exactly. And this, for instance, brought a negative research into play.
Yep.
So that 21 spot is probably going to come into play midway, maybe a little past midway through the game, based on our plays.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely kind of heats things up and changes things towards the end.
For players also that looking for a little bit more depth, there is a drafting mechanism within the game too, that at the start of the game you can actually draft your starting mutations. Instead of putting them here, you get to draft and take one, pass it, take one, pass it, and so forth, which allows you to kind of tailor your strategy right from the start of the game. This is a really cool game. Like I said at the very beginning, this is an area control style game that does a lot with just a very few number of components.
Right, and it's so accessible. You know better than anyone, I'm not a huge fan of area control.
Right.
This one is so family friendly. The artwork speaks to me. It's such a clean design. And the playfulness helps that nastiness. It kind of washes it a little bit. You know, it's fun when people are kicking you out. And the theme, you can really get your head around this theme. Even kids can get their head around this theme where there's a virus in the lungs and the doctors are getting rid of it. Other viruses are coming in and mutating viruses. It's a really cool, accessible area control game.
There's a lot of cool things you can do with it too. We didn't mention, but one of the abilities is to move. So you can use some very cool strategic ways of placing it in one organ and then moving across an organ to gain control of those, very surprisingly to other players at the table. Now, the one thing I will say that I don't like about the game is that the two-player version, most two-player games don't play very well as an area control style game. This one, the same way, it uses a dummy player, so you don't have that third player who's making obvious human reactions to what players are doing. You're using a dummy player that flips over cards and seeds the board with viruses in particular areas. So be noted of that if you like these style of games, but play a lot as a two-player.
Yeah, I mean, as like you said, with any area control game, it's not going to shine at the two-player count. But other than that, I really like it. I've said it already, but the artwork is fantastic. Not to mention the fact that every one of these mutation cards, completely different artwork.
Absolutely.
So they've got these weird, cute little critters on every single card. It's a different one. Your starting decks have some different characters.
Yep.
These event cards look like...
They're beautiful artwork.
The old Garbage Pail Kid cards,
absolutely.
that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, fantastic package altogether, guys. It's coming out at Gen Con.
Coming out at Gen Con, I just heard Tom mention that they're going to have copies to demo at their convention coming up.
Cool.
But yeah, I think it's going to be available to Gen Con. I'm definitely going to look for a copy for sure.
And good job, Tom, again, for picking a winner here. This is a fantastic game. Viral, Arcane Wonders, Dice Tower Essentials game. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do here, Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 1 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored by our friends at TMG Games. And at Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.